Welcome to Wellywood Wargaming, where the grim dark never sleeps. Crack open a bottle of Wild Snake and spark up a low stick as we take a journey down Underhive.
Greetings Hive Scum and welcome back. I figured out that in 3 years of creating Necromunda content, I haven't actually ever done an official gang tier list video of any kind so far. Now that we're in 2025, I feel like we've actually got a really good amount and spread of gangs and factions in Necromunda now with which to do this. I've always been a little bit hesitant and a little bit uncomfortable tiering stuff in a relatively unbalanced game. Of course, this isn't 40k, it's not Kill Team, it's not a competitive game, but objectively, you can pretty much tell which gangs are more effective overall in the game generally than others. So what I've been doing lately is creating a vast spreadsheet for every single faction and gang in Necromunda and scoring them in total out of 13 little sections. Each of these sections I've scored between 1 and 5, 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, and the sections are as follows. The first section is House List. This is what the gang gets access to throughout a campaign and from starting creation as well. The unique equipment they get, the unique war gear, as well as the sort of spread and just amount of stuff that you get access to for that gang. The next one is cost effectiveness, so how cheap or expensive your gang is and how easy it is to build lists with as well. The two obvious ones here, we have shooting and melee. These are two separate ones that I've also scored each gang in. Of course, a gang like Vansar is going to be a lot higher in shooting, and a gang like Corpse Grinders are going to be a lot higher in melee. The next one is durability, the overall hardiness of a gang in Necromunda. And we then have mobility as well, how fast the gang is, how good they are at outmaneuvering their opponents and whatnot. The next one is versatility in style of play and in the sort of general stuff that they can bring to the table. How well versed are they at facing different types of opponents? And then we have the unique mechanics for that gang as well. Some of the gangs in Necromunda don't have any real sort of unique gang mechanics, but you have gangs like Goliath and Cordor and Eshcher that have very specific sort of niche mechanics that they can use, and how good are they overall. Then of course we have skill access, so which skill trees are available to each gang, whether it's champions, leaders, gangers, specialists and juves, how good the overall skill tree access is for each of these gangs. We have hangers-on, pets and brutes. This is all factored into one score. Some gangs have a lot more access to better and more varied hangers-on, brutes and pets. The next one is gang tactic cards and which unique decks that you can build, which ones have the best access to tactics cards if you're using them in your games. We then have campaign progression as well, which is a really important factor in choosing a gang for a campaign, of course, how well lasting they are in long or mid or short campaigns. And lastly, we have vehicles as well. If you're playing Ashwaists, what are the types of vehicles and accessibility of vehicles for the gang in question? Before I get into this, please do like, share, subscribe, and I really do reiterate that. Please do subscribe. It does make a big difference. If you haven't hit that subscribe button already, please do. Also consider checking out my Patreon as well if you'd like to support me even further. And also, please do take into account that this is going to be subjective to the local meta that you play, the types of campaigns that you play, your arbitrator and house rules as well. All of that is going to be sort of factored in here, and it will be slightly different depending on where you are and who you play with. So this isn't absolutely gospel, but it is, I think, a pretty good way of measuring how good each gangs are in Necromunda. So let's get into it. There are some omissions here. Firstly, we've got the incursion gangs. I decided not to include any incursion gangs here because by bolting on a Spyro leader to any of the 6 house gangs, it's not really going to adjust the tier too much. It's just going to make the house gangs a bit better, perhaps in some cases. Some cases not, actually. I've also not included any Genestealer corrupted or Chaos tainted gangs in here either, because again, it's just going to make those 6 better than they already are, generally speaking, and it won't actually adjust the tier otherwise, I don't think. Okay, so we're going to work from the bottom up here with the absolute dregs of Necromunda. There are only 2 in my tier 3 here. Have you guessed which ones they are? The first one is Malstrain Gangs. Now, Malstrain Gangs are a bit of a weird one. When Secundus came out, everybody was excited about playing a slightly different variant of Genestealer Cultists. However, they just didn't really deliver on this, and Malstrain Gangs have been geared towards being played as an NPC arbitrator gang. The main reason for this is they have little to no campaign development at all. You can't have weapons on any of the Genestealers, of course, so, you know, in a campaign, they gain skills and XP and stats and stuff like that, but they can't do a lot else. They are incredibly good in close combat, of course, but that's really it. The rest of your gang is made up mainly of just brood scum and tyramites occasionally as pets. Tyramites are pretty good, but the brood scum are just hive scum and can't really level up or do anything interesting or access the trading post or get any cool stuff in campaigns. And for that reason, Malstrain Gangs are just pretty poor compared to any other gang. Sure, they're a bit scary with the Genestealers and stuff, but they're just not really a proper gang. And the way that I've scored this here, they've been scored very low in most areas except for melee, actually. There aren't really any real strong points for Malstrain Gangs otherwise, and that is why they are bottom of the pile here. The second gang, and I feel a bit harsh for these guys because they have been left behind, is Ogrins. Ogrins, you know, I know there are lots of very fond Ogrin players out there. Sadly, Ogrins have been completely made obsolete, in my opinion, by the new Venator gangs. But we're going to talk about Venators in a bit. Now that we can have effectively Venator Ugrin Gangs, the actual Ugrin slave gangs are kind of obsolete unless you just want to play Lobo slaves, but Lobo slaves are pretty boring overall. The way that I've scored these guys, they've come in at 29 points, so they're very much the same as Malstrain Gangs in their overall effectiveness. The only sort of 5 out of 5 that I've scored them for here is durability. They are incredibly durable with high wounds, high toughness. They are basically giant punch bags for gangs to just wail on. They can soak up a lot of damage, and they're decent in close combat too, but they can't do a lot else. Sure, they can chuck grenades far and stuff, but overall they're fairly limited in what they can do in a campaign, whether it's Ashwaist or Underhive, and I just feel like they're really, really lacking now, especially when you consider the new Venators. So into tier 2 now. It is quite a jump from 29 points up to 37 points, which is the bottom of tier 2. Most of these gangs are distinctly average. They are fun to play, sure, and they've got strengths and weaknesses, definitely, and we'll explore those in a second, but really, across the board here, a lot of these have been scored between 2, 3, and 4 points. Nothing really stands out too much in most cases. The bottom of my tier 2 here, we have Chaos Hellets. Chaos Hellets are an interesting gang. They're a fairly hoardy gang, but when you compare them to something similar like Cordor, they fall short in nearly every way. Where they score a little higher on is in cost. They are a cheap gang, so again, you can have more fighters than your opponent most of the time. They've also got really good skill access, which is worth noting here as well, in cunning and ferocity skill trees being available across the board. They've also got a little bit of psychic ability in there with the witch as well. They've also got excellent pets in the psychic familiar too, which is excellent. This is the same as Genestealer Cult, which we're going to talk about in a second too. But otherwise, in terms of tactics cards, they don't really have much. They've got 1 or 2 unique tactics cards that are okay, but otherwise they score very low on this. They don't really have an exceptionally good unique mechanic. Other than that, their melee is okay, their shooting is okay. Mainly it's the numbers that sort of do the stuff for Hellets, and the fact that you can invoke the dark gods as well for a little bit of a bonus, and if you're lucky enough, get a really good chaos spawn as well. They certainly are at the bottom of this tier 2 that I've got here. So overall, Hellets don't really stack up as one of the best gangs in the game. They're certainly at the bottom of tier 2 here, and you can see why really. They are decent, but nothing really stands out particularly for Chaos Hellets, other than that they're fairly hoardy. You know, you've got a bit of immunity to insanity and stuff in there, a little bit of psychic ability, but otherwise fairly dull. Just 1 point above the Chaos Hellets, and we have the Genestealer Cult. Genestealer Cult are a little bit more interesting than Hellets in that you have more versatility in the fighter types. We've got Aberrants. We've still got the Psychic Familiars, which are excellent, by the way. What really lets Genestealer Cult down generally is the champions being only wounds 1, but you get the same skill access, having cunning and ferocity across the board. You get some more weird powers in there with your Gene Stealer Adept as well. The Alpha is a pretty good leader, and they're okay generally. Again, the tactics cards really let them down here. I think there's only 1 or 2 unique tactics cards for Gene Stealer Cult, and they're not that great. Otherwise, they're pretty much similar to Chaos Hellets, slightly less hoardy, but slightly better equipped with a better house list as well. Some more unique gear in there, particularly for the aberrants running around with heavy rock cutters, and you've got shock whips and a bunch of other cool weapons in here that you don't get access to with your Hellets, and that's where they're slightly above here in the tier 2. Also on 38 points here, and I don't think this is any surprise to anybody, is of course Enforcers and Bad Zone Enforcers. Enforcers have actually scored ever so slightly lower than Bad Zone Enforcers for a number of reasons. Enforcers are very average in terms of their stats. In fact, not very good most of the time. They're decent in campaign progression and stuff, but not amazing. They get some okay tactics cards, and their house list is generally pretty good as well. They're quite a shooty gang, but don't really make up for it in the ballistic skill and weapon skill stats. They do somehow get some good access to shooting skills as well as the Palanite drill skills, which some of them are pretty good. It's also worth noting that your regular Enforcers do get one of the best pets in the game in the hard case Cyber Mastiff, as well as a unique brute, a unique vehicle, and a bunch of other cool stuff as well. But otherwise, the way that I've scored these guys, they are pretty much distinctly average across the board. Nothing really lets them down other than the stats generally. And I'd say that in terms of campaigns and stuff, the one sort of forgiving factor that they get is that your numbers are never going to be lower than your starting numbers, really, because if someone dies, you get a free rookie back, which is quite nice. Now, to talk about Bad Zone Enforcers quickly, Bad Zone Enforcers are slightly better here. I've got them above Enforcers, still on the same points, but above Enforcers just on the amount of versatility that you've got. You know, the regular Enforcers are a little bit more elite, and Bad Zone Enforcers get access to very cheap Hive Scum conscripts, which I think does make the difference. It means that you can have more fighters in your gang generally, but also you get access to more unique equipment on your Bad Zone Enforcers as well. Web guns spring to mind, particularly, and there are sort of like pros and cons to Bad Zone or regular Enforcers. Some people would say regular Enforcers are better. I think Bad Zone Enforcers overall are a slightly more versatile gang and a little bit more fun from a narrative perspective, if you ask me too, but they're both firmly in tier 2 here, in the middle of the pack, I would say. In with 39 points, also in tier 2 and slightly above the Enforcers here, I've got the Ashwaist Nomads. Ashwaist Nomads are a little bit frustrating in some ways, particularly because they are limited strictly, as written at least, to the Ashwaists, and you can't really play them that effectively in the Underhive if you're sticking to rules as written. So that is something to consider. Ashwaist Nomads do score particularly high on mobility here. They are the fastest gang in the game on their base movement stats. The only fighter that has average movement in an Ashwaist's gang is the champions, in fact. Everything else is a lot faster, and we have movement 6 across the board on most of the fighter types there. So that's a real standout there. I'd also say their shooting capacity is better than their melee capacity generally, and that's taking into account the new Shadar Hunters, which are a little bit underwhelming overall. Especially outside of the Ashwaist, you're just probably not going to take them. I'd say the shooting's pretty good, particularly with the access to the long rifles and the blast carbines, things like that. They get some great heavy weapons as well, and they're an interesting gang. They are a snipey sort of gang with some surprise tactics, but the fact that they're limited to the Ashwaists, you know, rules as written does really hamper them in a lot of ways. And you know, vehicles as well. They don't get an actual vehicle. They just get Hellamite riders, and that's a bit of a letdown. One other thing that I would say is particularly good for Ashwaist Nomads is the Brute is excellent. The Anthromite Dune Scuttler is excellent, and they have some access to some really good pets in the Ashwing Hellamite, as well as the Spine Worms as well, which are really good too. So that is the Ashwaist Nomads near the top of tier 2 here. Now, lastly, at the top of tier 2, this might upset a few people because I know these are a very popular gang, and it's the only house gang that I've got in tier 2. This is House Eshcher. Now, House Eshcher, I would say, are weaker than the other 5 house gangs. It's a bold statement, I know, but that's how I've scored it here. They don't have anything exceptional about them, but they don't have anything inherently weak about them either. They're decent at shooting, they're decent at mobility, they've got a bit of versatility, they've got very good close combat options with the Death Maiden and the Queen and things like that. They have good brutes and pets and whatnot, but just nothing that particularly is actually that outstanding. The sort of main mechanic that you get in sort of chem alchemy, it's good, but it's not great compared to the other unique mechanics that we have on some of the other houses. Not all of them, it's still very good, mind, but it does rely on upkeep and money going into it as well. You need a chemist to do it, and it's just, I would say overall Eshcher are the most middle of the road gang. The way that I've scored them here is nothing is below 3, so it's really just 3s and 4s all the way along, so they really are the most distinctly average gang in the game. Of course, they've got lots of flavor and they're fun and they're cool and stuff, but they just don't quite measure up against the other 5 house gangs, I'm afraid. Is this going where you thought it was going so far? I'd be interested to know down in the comments whether you expected Eshcher to be in tier 2, for example, Ashwaist Nomads, things like that, but it's just the way that I've scored it here. The little jump here from 39 up to 41, it's only 2 points, but I think this is enough to quantify tier 1. Tier 1 involves 7 gangs here, more than tier 2, and these are some of the best gangs in the game. We're going to reserve tier 0 for last, which has 3 gangs in it. See if you can guess which 3 gangs those are. But at the bottom of tier 1, we have squat prospectors. Now, squat prospectors, I think most people would accept that they're in tier 1. Are they at the bottom of tier 1? I guess that's up to you and your local meta. They have some really strong points. They have some really strong downsides as well. We're going to take a look at those now. The main problem that I think we have with squats is that they are very expensive. They are an elite gang. They cost quite a lot at base, and their equipment and weapons and war gear and stuff is very, very expensive. So it is quite hard to build a gang list with squats that's good and has enough bodies in it. It's very hard to do that straight away. They do have a few hangers-on and stuff like the claim jumper that you can add in for very little cost and high reward, but otherwise they are a very expensive gang. The main strong point for squat prospectors is, of course, their shooting. They have fantastic shooting and access to some of the most punishing rapid fire and dagger weapons in the game. They're right up there with Vansar for me in terms of their shooting ability, so I scored them 5 on this. Sure, they don't have the best ballistic skill, as do Vansar. They don't have ballistic skill 2+ or anything. They're less accurate, but they spit out a lot more dagger than Vansar typically as well. So be very, very wary about mid-range engaging with squats, because they will really, really put the hurt on you. They also have a very high durability as well, with toughness 4 across the board and some access to some good armor and stuff like that as well. So they're pretty tough to remove, squats. A difficult customer most of the time. Another letdown for squats is their low mobility. They are very slow. Everybody knows this. Of course, you can have diggers, which are movement 5, which I think is kind of cheating. I feel like they should still be movement 4. But everything else is movement 4, which makes the squats very slow and easy to outposition and outmaneuver as well as a result. The squat's unique mechanic is also quite interesting. It's not that powerful, but it's really good in terms of campaign progression, and some of them can really save your fighters from dying or give you more credits and things like that, which do make squats pretty solid in a campaign throughout generally. Okay, in at number 9 now, we have got the Spyros or Spire Hunters. Only 1 point higher than the squats here, mind, and this was a bit of a hard one to do because they're incredibly swingy and very situational in how you play them and the types of environments and scenarios that you play Spyros in as well. I'd say the strongest thing for Spyros generally actually is their mobility. They are a highly mobile gang. They can get everywhere all over the board, and yes, you have a much more elite gang that costs a flipping absolute ton of credits to run. You're probably only going to have 3 or 4 Spyros in a gang to begin with. They are very, very powerful indeed. As everybody knows, they get double activations, so they get 2 activation markers each turn, which is amazing. It means you can move around and out-activate and double charge and do all sorts of cool shenanigans. And the base sort of movement stat is very good across the board as well. We've got grapnel launchers and wings on 2 of them. We've also got some really solid shooting and close combat in here as well. The main sort of downers for Spyros, of course, is the cost. They're very, very expensive, and the fact that they have absolutely no access to any vehicles whatsoever. So if you're going to play any sort of Ashwaists battle, you're going to really struggle doing any sort of damage to vehicles and stuff, or keeping up with things. You just can't do it. You can't even have dirt bikes, so don't even think about it. And that's Spyros. Okay, so in the middle of tier 1, on the same points as Spire Hunters, we have Corpse Grinder Cult. Now, Corpse Grinder Cult, people are very scared of them. When they came out, they were certainly very scary, but I do honestly think now that many of the other gangs, particularly all the ones above this that I'm going to talk about in a second, now have something to deal with corpse grinders, or are just frankly better in a number of other ways than corpse grinders. Sure, corpse grinders are arguably the best melee or close combat gang in the game. That's not to be disputed, but they do have some failings, of course. Shooting, they're not very good at. I mean, that's not really why you'd play corpse grinders. Of course, you can have some shooting with your initiates and stuff, but they've only got average ballistic skill, and they get access to some okay shooty weapons. We're not including hand flamers there because they're not really a shooting weapon, but I'd say corpse grinders do have some weaknesses. They have some obvious strengths. You know, the masks are very hard to deal with and stuff, unless they're on fire, which is a really good way of dealing with them. Cordor, for example, are a direct counter to corpse grinders, I would say, and corpse grinders really, really struggle dealing with Cordor gangs. Corpse grinders don't have a unique mechanic as such. There was something that came out in an Apocrypha Necromunda, but it isn't really anything to write home about. We also have no real access to hangers-on, pets and brutes that are unique either. They also have no real vehicle access other than the sort of thing that we got in another Apocrypha Necromunda, I suppose, as well. They're pretty good with their durability. They are quite hard to remove at times, and they also have pretty good mobility as well, especially when you factor in the mass infiltrate of your initiates and the high move of your guys if you give them the right skills. But overall, I would say corpse grinders certainly can be beaten, and I don't think they are the cream of the crop in Necromunda anymore. And you can argue with me about that as much as you like, but I just feel that corpse grinders aren't nearly as good as people give them credit for these days, and you can beat them. You can do it. Okay, so the second worst or least best house gang I've got here is actually Vansar. So again, Vansar used to, a couple of years ago, used to be one of the most effective and scariest gangs in the game. I think a lot of the other gangs have caught up now or overtaken them in some way. So Vansar, we've got only 1 point higher than Corpse Grinders, by the way, with 43 points. The obvious downside to Vansar, there are a couple. The obvious downside to me, though, really is the cost. They are very expensive. The base cost is very expensive. They're an elite gang. You're going to run a gang with less guys than someone else, so it means that you're generally going to get out activated a lot in your games, which is a problem when you have low movement as well, and it's the same problem that squats suffer with. Squats and Vansar are kind of similar in some ways, particularly in their elite nature and the fact that they're both shooty gangs. Talking about shooting quickly though, Vansar are the best at shooting most accurately. Generally they have the higher ballistic skill across the board. Your basic guys are ballistic skill 3+, your Juves are ballistic skill 4+, and your champs and leaders are ballistic skill 2+, with access to energy weapons, hotshot las guns, plasma guns, melter guns, things like that. They're a very, very, very scary shooting threat. They're also, by the way, a lot more durable than people think as well. Having the built-in armored undersuit and just giving them mesh armor means that your Vansar are all 4+ on their saves, which is really, really good. So it's worth thinking about that. They are quite durable compared to other house gangs otherwise. I would say the unique mechanic, Cybertechnica, for Vansar is not very strong. Sure, it's fun and it's interesting and you can do some cool stuff. You can get a price reduction on your architects, things like that. But overall, it is overcosted and it's just not quite as good as, say, gene smithing or Articles of Faith or some of the better unique house mechanics. The other things that are good about Vansar is they do get very good skill access with Savant, shooting, things like that. Shooting, I'd say, is the best skill tree generally all around. We've also got some of the best hangers-on, pets and brutes. They're brute. The Arachne rig is fantastic, but you also get access to the little web spiders as well, the cyberarachnids, which are horrifically powerful in the right hands as well. So I've scored them pretty high for that as well. They're not the best, but they're almost the best in terms of this as well. In terms of the vehicles, they get the weird jumping Ashwaist spider rig things as well, which are pretty good in game too. But otherwise, they're fairly average. Obviously, melee is their main downside. I've scored them sort of a 2 out of 5 for that because they can actually do some melee stuff, particularly with the spider rig and the Arachne rig as well. They've got some okay close combat options that people don't generally consider with Vansar as a backup anyway. So that's Vansar, 43 points and in the middle of tier 1. Next up on 43 points as well, the same as Vansar, and I would say pretty much equal to Vansar in power level here is the Orlock, House of Iron. Now, Orlocks, I'd say, are more of a general across-the-board Ryu from Street Fighter type gang. They even look like Ryu from Street Fighter with the headband as well, but they are pretty solid throughout. I'd say the only sort of slight downside about House Orlock is their unique mechanic kind of sucks too. Sure, it's basically an extra skill for your leaders and champs on creation, and it can be good later on in the campaign when you give people the unique names and stuff, but it's not that exciting. Most of them aren't very good, and it's just doesn't really lend to any sort of creativity with the gang and stuff. It's solid. There are some really good ones, particularly that you can make your leader pretty much unkillable most of the time as well. And the sort of mobility and durability of Orlock is pretty good as well, particularly with the access to the ferocity skills and shooting skills, two of the best skill trees in here as well. They don't have any real strong downsides, but they're very good at shooting with lots of shotguns, bolt guns, and heavy weapons too. Orlock are a really solid gang throughout, and they definitely deserve to be up there with House Vansar, if maybe a little bit above Vansar. So there you go. We are into the top 5 now, and number 5 comes in as Outcasts here. Outcasts at 44 points, just one ahead of Vansar, and Orlock here are a really hard one to quantify because, of course, Outcasts really do depend on your leadership group, whether it's a generic leader, whether it is a dramatis personae, or whether it is a sort of delegation from a guild or a noble house or something like that. Where Outcasts really shine is in their versatility. They can do an awful lot of stuff, and that really does depend on how you build your leaders and champions, of course. They also have the best skill access, generally being that you can choose the types of skills that you get on your leaders and champs, which is awesome. But I would also say here, they get the best tactics cards in the game. There are some incredibly powerful tactics cards for Outcast gangs, or exclusive to Outcast gangs. There's one that gives you at least 5 free scum with all their equipment, I think, which is a few friends. They also have one which is gives you a weapon from the trading post up to rarity 9 for the activation. So hello web gun, things like that, or hello heavy rock cutter. So they've got some very, very powerful tactics cards. They've got one that just ignores a serious injury or a memorable death, I think, and just goes straight into out cold. Outcasts are a really, really interesting way to play Necromunda, and before Venators came out, I was all about Outcasts, and I do love playing Outcasts generally. They're the gang that I've actually played the most in campaigns overall because there are so many ways that you can build them, but they are generally a less elite version of Venators with more chaffy bodies in your hive scum and less access to rare and unique equipment as well. But definitely deserving of a top spot here in 44. I just think overall, if you consider everything that you have to consider with Outcasts, they can be incredibly, incredibly powerful if you go with the right combinations. All right, last and top of tier 1 here, we have the House of Shadow, House Delac. They are the 3rd best house gang in my book anyway, and they come in at 45 points. So definitely a winner at the top of tier 1 here. House Delac have some really obvious strong points, but they're actually a pretty versatile gang. I would say the main strong point for House Delac, actually, from what I've scored here, is the hangers-on pets and brutes are off the scale good. The Piscean Spectre arguably is the best brute in the game. We have the little serpent guys who are pretty great and act as nodes for your psychic abilities as well. You also have the Spiker too, which is very, very powerful indeed. So really, really high in that. They're also pretty good with their tactics cards, pretty good with their campaign progression as well. Their skill axis is excellent as well, with Savant, Cunning, a little bit of shooting, stuff like that, as well as lots of psychic powers too. Yes, some of those psychic powers and the unique mechanics around the way that the psychic powers work is suboptimal at times, but you can do some really, really powerful combinations with it, and Psychoterica can be a real force. They are not a beginner gang. Delac take a little bit of skill to be able to manage properly and efficiently, but if you really get to grips with Delac, they are a very, very tricky customer to deal with, and they have weapons and tools and ways of dealing with every single gang in the game. There is no hard counter for House Delac, really, I don't think. Being able to switch the lights on and off, things like that. They've got got lots of sneaky cool stuff that you can do. They're pretty mobile. They've got a decent mobility, decent versatility. We've got and a very good house list as well, with access to web guns, grav guns, and all sorts of cool weapons like flechette pistols and stuff too. So that is Delac, and that is the top of tier 1. Is it going the way that you thought it was going? We're now going to talk about the top 3 gangs in Necromunda for 2025. Have you guessed which 3 those are? All right, it's time for that drum roll. We have the top 3 gangs in the game of Necromunda for 2025, as of 2025. In at number 3, we have House Cordor, the House of Faith, my favorite house of the 6 main houses anyway. Cordor are an amazingly powerful gang. They're a really, really hard counter to certain gangs, like I've said, particularly Corpse Grinders, stuff like that. The amount of blaze and template you can have on Cordor is disgusting, quite frankly. They're a hoardy gang. They're more hoardy than anyone else, and that usually wins out. More bodies is usually more victory in most cases, I would say. And I mean, where I've scored them the highest on this is cost. They are very cost efficient. You've got incredibly cheap bone pickers and whatnot, and their equipment isn't too expensive either. For what you can do with it, for the level of power that you get against cost, they are very, very good indeed. The unique mechanic here, the Articles of Faith, is arguably right up there as one of the best, if not the best, unique mechanic, particularly if you mix and match. I would avoid people mixing and matching between the different Articles of Faith that you can do, or the different trees or paths of faith, should I say. That is definitely a very dodgy one if you're mixing and matching, but some of them are just so brilliant and so powerful that they really do have to put Cordor up here in tier 0. The tactics cards as well, they get access to some frighteningly good tactics cards too, and otherwise they're scoring 4s and 3s in every other area as well. There's no real downside to Cordor, I would say. They are an absolutely awesome gang, and I urge you all to play them if you haven't already. They're very popular. Lots of people love Cordor, and they're very, very hard to counter. If you've got a good player playing a good Cordor gang, good luck, basically. In at number 2, of course, we have Goliath. So I don't think this was any surprise to anybody, because Goliaths are absolutely one of the best gangs in the game here, and it's proven here. They're on the same points as Cordor, though, 48 points, both of them, and they're both great for different reasons. I would say, though, that Goliath shine in some really interesting ways, but they have more obvious downsides to them as well. The durability is particularly high for House Goliath. Not only do they have access to some really good skills which further help that durability, but having toughness 4 across the board is so much better than having toughness 3 in general. Obviously, squats benefit from this as well, as so do Ogrins and stuff, but Goliaths just do it even better, particularly when you consider things like dermal hardening and some of the gene smithing that we're going to talk about in a second as well. I would say, though, that a real downside for Goliath is their general mobility. They are a slow gang, and they're slow to advance. It's not usually a problem because they're so tough, but they are not a mobile gang. They're fairly slow and laborious, and that can be a little bit annoying for newer players. So they're not the most fun in terms of moving around the board and stuff, but they make up for it in so many other ways. Their unique mechanic, gene smithing, I think is the best unique mechanic in the game. I think before gene smithing, Goliaths were very bland and a little bit boring in their play style generally, but the way that gene smithing has brought in not only sort of optimizing each guy, you can certainly like min-max it and make every single fighter the most efficient, you know, cost efficient and all that as well. You can also nerf your own guys, which adds a little bit more narrative twist, and I just think makes them a really interesting gang to play. You could give all your fighters toughness 5 across the board, you know, don't do it, but you certainly can do it. But you can also do some really interesting things with taking stats from places and putting them in other places just to make your Goliath gang play a little bit more differently, thus raising the overall sort of versatility of your Goliath gang as well. So really good on that. I would say that Goliaths don't get access to the best brutes, hangers-on and pets, because even though they're quite good in their own right, they don't actually bring anything unique to Goliath. The Sump Croc, although is nice, doesn't give Goliath anything extra or exciting, and the Brute doesn't do that either, because the Stimmer, quite frankly, is generally a bit better anyway. So I'd avoid those two. They get some good vehicles as well with the Mauler and stuff, and their tactics cards are off the chain. Pun intended, some of the Goliath tactics cards are actually broken and probably shouldn't be used. But, you know, if you're using a random system, you've got 1 or 2 in there, it's fine every now and then. But some of them are so powerful, it's not even funny. So yeah, Goliaths absolutely are up there at the absolute top of Necromunda, and I don't think that was any surprise. Goliaths and Cordor, the 2 best house gangs in the game. You've guessed it. In at number 1, we have Venthyrs. Okay, so here we are. In at number 1, the best gang in Necromunda overall in 2025 is, of course, Venthyrs. I say this with conviction because I really do believe it in my heart. Venthyrs have always been my favorite gang, along with Outcast, actually, and now they've just got a hell of a lot better. And they're not better in a toxic, cloyingly competitive kind of way. They're just brilliant all around. The obvious things that make Venthyrs great is the house list. They don't have a house list, right? They have access to whichever house legacy you take, and that means that you've got, you know, the leader's house equipment list for any of the 6 houses, as well as rarity value really high on your leaders and champions and gangers as well. So you've got access to all of the gear and most of the idea as well with your house list. They are incredibly high on versatility. You can do pretty much anything with Venthyrs. You can make them very close combat focused. You can make them very shooting focused. You can have a little bit of psychic powers in there. You can make them all Ogrins or squats. And you can have mix and match, which is the best way to do it generally anyway. They are flipping amazing. I would say actually the cost effectiveness for Venthyrs, they used to be, and they still are very expensive, don't get me wrong. But what you can do now is you can throw in rattlings, and rattlings are very cheap. You can have a few really expensive fighters and then make up the bulk of the rest of your gang with very cheap rattlings, which actually makes Venthyrs still an elite gang, but actually pretty cost efficient if you're going to add rattlings in the mix as well. The skill access for Venthyrs is, of course, off the scale as well, because you can basically just choose whatever skill tree you want for your Venthyrs, and you can really mix and match here. You could have like agility with shooting, or ferocity with savant, some weird combinations like that, and you can really go to town on this as well. So, I mean, the only real downside for Venthyrs is they don't have any unique hangers-on pets and brutes, and they don't have any sort of unique vehicles or unique mechanics, particularly other than the sort of bounty mechanics that you get here as well. They do have 1 or 2 unique tactics cards, and one of them is very, very, very good in blood money. We've actually banned that in our groups, but it is very, very good in terms of campaign progression as well for your Venthyrs. But otherwise, really, the shooting is pretty much as good as you want it to be. The melee is as good as you want it to be. The durability is as good as you want it to be. So the sky's the limit with Venthyrs. They are the best gang on paper here, but also the best gang in terms of hobbying, in terms of kit bashing and painting and narrative as well. And that is where I think they should be. I think they should be at the top here, and they should be the gang that people want to play, because this is where we get all of that beautiful flavor and narrative and fluff that we love so much about Necromunda. So anyway, this was quite a long video. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I did this, because even though I'm sure many people will disagree with some of this, I'm glad I got it out there, because it's been 3 years in the running for me to get an actual tier list out. And I'd like to see what your opinions are on this, whether you think I'm completely wrong on most of it, or I'm right in most of it. I'm not really sure. And again, it's subjective to your sort of meta and stuff as well, so do bear that in mind. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Please do like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace out.